Who cleared this civilian into my briefing? The voice cut through the room like a blade, sharp and precise, the kind of authority that didn't need to be repeated. The air inside the operations room at Fort Liberty stilled instantly, conversations dying mid-sentence as heads turned toward the speaker. Staff Sergeant Cole Mercer stood at the front, arms crossed over his chest, his posture rigid, his eyes locked on the old man seated quietly near the far wall. The room itself was a controlled storm of modern warfare. Digital maps glowing across a 20-foot screen, satellite feeds flickering in real time, operators in full tactical gear leaning over tablets and laptops, their movements fast, efficient, rehearsed. Everything in the room spoke of precision, speed, and control. Everything except him. Daniel Hayes sat alone in a metal chair that looked too small for the weight he carried, his posture relaxed but not careless, his hands resting lightly on a worn leather cane. His jacket was plain, outdated, the kind of thing you'd find in the back of a closet and forget about for 20 years. One pant leg was neatly folded and pinned above the knee, the absence beneath it unspoken, unacknowledged. He didn't look at Mercer. He didn't look at anyone. His gaze was fixed on the mission map glowing at the front of the room, as if the rest of the world simply didn't exist. A low murmur spread through the operators, subtle but unmistakable, the quiet amusement of men who had spent years at the tip of the spear and believed they had seen everything worth seeing. Mercer took a slow step forward, boots echoing against the polished concrete floor, each step deliberate, controlled, meant to establish dominance without saying a word. "This is a restricted briefing," he said, his tone calmer now, but no less sharp. "You're in the wrong place." No response. Not even a glance. Hayes remained still, his eyes tracing the contour lines of the terrain on the screen, following the ridges and valleys like he was reading something only he could understand. That silence, more than any insult, tightened something in Mercer's chest. It wasn't defiance. It was indifference. And that was worse. A few of the younger operators exchanged looks, smirks tugging at the corners of their mouths. One of them leaned back in his chair, whispering just loud enough to be heard. "Maybe he's lost." A ripple of quiet laughter followed, quickly suppressed, but not gone. Mercer stopped just a few feet in front of Hayes now, close enough to cast a shadow over him. Up close, the old man looked even more out of place. Weathered skin, pale blue eyes, steady and distant, like they had spent too many years looking at things no one else in the room had ever seen. Mercer tilted his head slightly, studying him, recalibrating. Then he spoke again, slower this time, each word placed with intention. "All right," he said, voice low, controlled. "Let's try something simple." He paused, just long enough for the room to lean in without realizing it. "What was your call sign?" The question landed lightly, almost casual, but there was an edge beneath it, something testing, probing. Around them, the room went quiet again, not out of respect, but curiosity. Someone chuckled under their breath. Another operator crossed his arms, waiting for the old man to stumble, to mumble something irrelevant, to confirm what they all already believed. Hayes didn't answer. Not immediately. His hand shifted slightly on the cane, fingers brushing against the smooth, worn leather grip. For a brief second, his eyes dropped from the screen to the surface of the table beside him, where a faint, nearly invisible scratch ran across the metal. His thumb traced it once, slowly, as if it meant something. Then he looked up, not at Mercer, past him, through him. And in that single moment, something in the room changed, subtle, almost imperceptible, like the air pressure dropping before a storm. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet, steady, and carried farther than it should have. "You wouldn't remember it," he said. The faintest pause. Then, softer still. "Not unless you were there." The words settled into the room like a weight no one could quite measure, and for a moment, no one moved, no one spoke, as if the air itself had paused to listen for something more. Mercer held his position, his expression unchanged on the surface, but there was a flicker behind his eyes now, a recalculation, a quiet irritation that the exchange had not gone the way he expected. He let out a short breath through his nose, almost a laugh, but not quite, and shifted his stance, boots scraping lightly against the concrete. "That's so," he said, voice low, controlled, but edged with something sharper now. "Because from where I am standing, it sounds like you do not have one." A few of the operators chuckled again, more confident this time, the tension easing just enough for arrogance to return. One of them leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. Watching the old man like this had turned into entertainment. Another tapped a pen against his tablet, the rhythm slow and deliberate, waiting for the moment the illusion would break. Hayes did not react. His gaze returned to the map, following a narrow valley that cut between two ridgelines, his eyes narrowing slightly, as if something there did not sit right with him. The glow from the screen reflected faintly in his pupils, steady and focused, completely detached from the conversation happening just a few feet away. Mercer noticed it. The lack of engagement. The absence of defense. It pressed on him in a way he could not quite explain. He took another step closer, closing the distance until he stood directly in front of Hayes, forcing himself into the old man's line of sight. "Let me make this clear," Mercer said, his voice dropping, the room quieting again around him as the tone shifted. "Everyone in this room has earned their place. Every man here has a call sign that means something. So if you're going to sit in on this briefing, you are going to answer the question." He paused, just long enough for the silence to tighten again. What was it? Hayes finally looked at him. Not quickly, not reactively. Slowly, deliberately, as if the movement itself carried weight. His eyes met Mercer's, and for the first time, the room felt the full presence of them. There was no challenge in that gaze. No anger. Just depth. The kind that made everything around it feel smaller. Mercer held it for a second longer than he intended, then straightened slightly, as if correcting his own posture without realizing it. Behind him, one of the operators shifted in his chair, the earlier amusement fading into something less certain. Hayes' hand moved again, this time sliding along the length of the cane, his fingers stopping near the base where the leather had worn thin over years of use. He pressed his thumb there, gently, almost absently. Somewhere in the distance, a radio on the far table crackled to life for half a second before going silent again, the sound sharp in the otherwise still room. Hayes' eyes flickered, just for an instant, not to the radio, but inward, as if something old and distant had surfaced without warning. The map on the wall blurred in his vision, replaced for the briefest moment by something else entirely, something only he could see. Then it was gone. He inhaled slowly, steady, controlled, and when he spoke again, his voice was softer than before, but it carried through the room with a clarity that cut deeper than volume ever could. "Names like that," he said, "they were not given for comfort." He let the words sit, not explaining, not elaborating, just placing them there. The room did not laugh this time. No one moved. Mercer's jaw tightened slightly, his confidence still there, but now layered with something else, something that had not been there a minute ago. Doubt. Small but real. He exhaled, then nodded once, as if deciding to push through it. "Then say it," he said. And this time, it was not a joke. The command did not echo. It settled, heavy and deliberate. And for a moment the entire room seemed to lean toward the old man without meaning to, drawn in by something none of them could quite define. Hayes did not move right away. His eyes remained on Mercer, steady and unblinking, as if measuring something far beyond the man standing in front of him. The glow of the mission screen flickered across his face, tracing the lines time had carved there, each one quiet, earned, and unmoving. Mercer held his ground, but the confidence that had filled his posture minutes ago no longer sat as comfortably on his shoulders. It was still there, but it had shifted, tightened, like a uniform pulled just a little too snug. Around them, the operators had gone completely silent now. No shifting chairs, no tapping pens, no whispered remarks. Even the low hum of the equipment seemed to fade into the background, leaving only the faint buzz of overhead lights and the distant echo of air moving through vents. Hayes' fingers curled slightly around the cane, the leather creaking softly under the pressure, a small sound that carried farther than it should have in the stillness. His gaze drifted for a fraction of a second, not away from Mercer, but past him, toward nothing visible in the room. And in that fraction, something changed. The present loosened its grip. The sharp lines of the briefing room softened, replaced by something older, something etched deeper into memory than any map on the wall. A low, distant hum filled the space in his mind, steady and rhythmic, like machinery working under strain. The air felt different there, thinner, heavier, carrying a weight that pressed against the chest and demanded attention. Voices overlapped, not loud, but urgent, controlled, disciplined in a way that came from long experience. A call sign moved through that memory, not spoken casually, not offered lightly, but carried with purpose, repeated with precision, acknowledged without question. It was not just a name. It was a position, a responsibility, a line that held when nothing else did. Hayes inhaled slowly, the sound quiet but deliberate, and the present snapped back into place with a clarity that felt almost sharper than before. His eyes refocused, locking once more onto Mercer, and this time there was no distance in them, no abstraction, just presence. He straightened slightly in the chair, not enough to draw attention, but enough that the shift was felt rather than seen. The room seemed to hold its breath with him. When he spoke, there was no hesitation, no emphasis, no attempt to impress. Just truth, placed exactly where it belonged. Titan 3. The words were simple. 2 syllables, followed by 1. Nothing more. But they did not fall away. They stayed. They settled into the room like something that had always been there, waiting to be recognized. No one laughed. No one moved. Mercer's expression did not change immediately, but something behind it did. His eyes flickered, just once, the smallest break in composure, like a signal that had not yet fully processed. Behind him, one of the operators shifted in his chair, the movement slow, uncertain, as if he was not sure whether he should be reacting at all. Another glance toward the far end of the table, where a closed laptop sat, untouched until now. Hayes said nothing else. He did not repeat it. He did not explain it. He simply let the words stand on their own, as if they were enough. And in that silence, something in the room began to unravel, not loudly, not visibly, but undeniably, like a thread, pulled loose from a uniform that had once seemed perfect. The silence did not break. It deepened, stretching across the room in a way that made every man inside it suddenly aware of his own breathing, of the faint shift of fabric, of the subtle weight of his own presence. Mercer did not respond immediately. He stood there, eyes fixed on Hayes, as if waiting for something else to follow, some explanation, some elaboration that would bring the moment back into something familiar. But nothing came. Just those 2 words, still hanging in the air, unchanged. Behind him, Sergeant Lucas Reed felt it first. Not recognition, not fully, but something close to it, a distant echo buried under years of training and routine. He had heard that structure before, not in conversation, not in casual talk, but over a channel that carried only what mattered. His eyes shifted slowly toward the table, toward the closed laptop that suddenly felt heavier than it had a minute ago. He hesitated. The hesitation of a man who understood that acting too quickly could be wrong, but doing nothing might be worse. Mercer finally exhaled, a controlled breath, and straightened his shoulders as if resetting himself back into command. That is it, he said, tone measured, almost dismissive, but not quite convincing. That is what you came in here with. A faint smirk touched one corner of his mouth, but it did not reach his eyes. Titan 3. He repeated it, slower, testing it, as if saying it out loud might strip it of whatever weight it had just carried. It did not. If anything, it settled deeper. A chair creaked softly near the back of the room. One of the operators shifted, his gaze no longer on Hayes, but on Reed now, as if sensing the change in him before understanding it. Reed moved. It was small at first, just a step toward the table, his hand hovering over the laptop without touching it. He glanced once at Mercer, not for permission, but out of habit, then back at the screen. The room noticed. Not openly, not with words, but with attention. Mercer saw it too, the shift in focus, and his jaw tightened slightly. "Stand down, Sergeant," he said, the command quiet but firm. Reed did not sit. He did not step back. He opened the laptop. The soft click of the lid sounded louder than it should have, cutting through the room with a clarity that drew every eye. The screen lit up, casting a pale glow across his face as lines of data began to populate. He typed carefully, deliberately, each keystroke measured, as if he understood that speed was not what mattered here. The system responded slowly, or maybe it only felt that way. Seconds stretched. The faint hum of the processor, the flicker of loading text, the subtle reflection of code in Reed's eyes. Mercer took a step toward him. "I gave you an order," he said, quieter now, but sharper. Reed did not look up. Yes, sir, he answered, voice steady. But there was something in it now, something that had not been there before. Not defiance. Not quite. Something closer to certainty. The screen shifted. A result populated. Not a file, not a profile, but something else. Restricted. Archived. Flagged. Reed's breath caught, just for a fraction of a second, and that was enough. Enough for the room to feel it. Mercer saw the change, the way Reed's posture stiffened, the way his hand hovered just above the keyboard now, no longer typing. What did you pull? Mercer asked, the question controlled, but no longer casual. Reed swallowed once, then finally looked up, not at Mercer, but past him, toward Hayes, his expression no longer uncertain. Just quiet, controlled shock. Sir, he said slowly, each word placed with care, this is not a standard call sign. The room did not move. No one spoke. And for the first time since he had entered, every man in that briefing room was looking at Daniel Hayes not as an interruption, not as a mistake, but as something they did not yet understand and were no longer sure they wanted to. The words did not leave the room. They pressed inward, tightening around every man standing there, turning the space between them into something heavier than silence. Mercer's eyes locked onto Reed now, no longer dismissive, no longer casual, but sharp, searching, demanding clarity without saying it out loud. Explain, he said, the single word carrying more weight than anything he had said before. Reed glanced back down at the screen, as if confirming what he already knew, his fingers hovering just above the keyboard without touching it. The data did not read like a normal entry. There were no standard identifiers, no clean lines of service history, no structured records the system usually provided. Instead, there were fragments, redacted blocks, timestamps without context, layers of clearance markers stacked over each other like barriers meant to stop anyone from looking too closely. Reed swallowed once, steadying himself. It does not resolve to a unit, he said slowly. No active registry. No archived personnel file in the standard database. A faint shift moved through the room, subtle but unmistakable, as operators leaned forward just slightly, their focus narrowing. Mercer took another step toward the table, his presence now less about control and more about understanding. Then where is it pulling from? He asked, his voice lower, controlled, but no longer edged with sarcasm. Reed hesitated for a fraction of a second, then tapped a single key. The screen changed again. A warning banner appeared, stark and immediate. Access restricted. Authorization required. The words glowed against the dark background, sharp and undeniable. Reed did not touch anything else. He did not need to. The message said enough. Behind them, one of the operators let out a quiet breath he did not realize he had been holding. Another shifted his stance, arms uncrossing, posture no longer relaxed. Mercer's jaw tightened again, but this time it was not irritation. It was recognition, or something close to it, the understanding that this situation had moved beyond his immediate control. He looked past Reed, back toward Hayes, who had not moved, not reacted, not even acknowledged the shift unfolding around him. The old man still sat exactly as he had before, one hand resting on the cane, the other relaxed at his side, his gaze once again fixed on the mission map, as if the entire exchange had nothing to do with him. That calm, that complete absence of urgency, pressed harder now than any display of authority could have. Mercer studied him for a long second, then turned back to Reed. Push it, he said quietly. Reed did not move. Sir, he replied, voice steady but firm. This is beyond our clearance. The room went still again. Not the same stillness as before. This one carried weight. Consequence. Mercer exhaled slowly, his eyes flicking once more toward the screen, then back to Hayes. The shift in the room was complete now. The earlier amusement, the quiet mockery, the casual confidence, all of it, had drained away, replaced by something sharper, something more precise. Respect had not arrived yet, but uncertainty had, and it was enough to change everything. From the far side of the room, a secure line indicator flickered to life on the wall console, a soft, almost unnoticed pulse of light that blinked once, then again, steady and insistent. Reed's eyes caught it immediately. He did not speak, but his posture changed, straightening just slightly as if instinct had taken over before thought could catch up. Mercer followed his gaze, and when he saw the indicator, Something in his expression shifted again, deeper this time. He knew that line. Everyone in the room did. It was not used often, only when something required attention far above their level. The light blinked again. No one moved to answer it. Not yet. Because in that moment, every man in the room understood the same thing without needing it spoken. Whatever Titan 3 was, it had just reached beyond them, and something on the other end had answered. The light on the secure line blinked again, steady and patient, as if it already knew it would be answered, as if it did not need urgency to command attention. No one in the room spoke. No one moved at first. The shift had already happened, and now they were all waiting, suspended in that narrow space between uncertainty and realization. Mercer's eyes remained fixed on the console for a long second, his expression unreadable, but the tension in his jaw had deepened, sharpened into something far more controlled than before. He turned slowly, scanning the room, not for answers, but for confirmation that every man there understood what that signal meant. They did. Reed stood closest. His posture had changed without him noticing, his shoulders squared, his focus locked onto the blinking indicator as if it were the only thing in the room that mattered. He took one step forward, then stopped, his hand hovering just short of the console. "Answer it," Mercer said, the command quiet, stripped of all earlier edge, but carrying a weight that left no room for hesitation. Reed nodded once and reached out. The moment his finger touched the console, the room seemed to tighten again, every sound compressing into silence. The line engaged with a soft click, followed by a brief pause that stretched longer than it should have. Then a voice came through. It was not loud. It did not need to be. Calm, controlled, and precise, the kind of voice that carried authority not through volume, but through certainty. "Identify the operator who accessed that call sign." Reed straightened instinctively. "Sergeant Lucas Reed, sir," he answered, his voice steady. But there was a carefulness in it now, a recognition of the level he was speaking into. A brief silence followed, not empty, but deliberate, as if something was being verified on the other end. Then the voice returned, sharper now, more focused. "Confirm the individual present." Reed's eyes flicked, just for a fraction of a second, toward Hayes, then back to the console. "Elderly male, civilian attire, mobility impairment, identifies as Daniel Hayes." Another pause, longer this time, the kind that carried movement behind it, unseen but undeniable. Mercer stepped closer, just enough to hear more clearly, his attention fully captured now, no trace of dismissal left. Around them, the operators stood motionless, every eye fixed either on the console or on the man seated quietly near the wall. The voice came back again, and this time there was no mistaking the shift. "Stand by." 2 words. Simple. Absolute. The line did not disconnect, but it went silent, leaving only the faint hum of the open channel. Reed did not move his hand from the console. Mercer did not speak. No one did. Seconds passed. Then, from the far end of the building, beyond the reinforced walls and secured doors, there was a change. Subtle at first. A distant echo of movement. The sound of footsteps, measured and fast, carried through the corridor outside. Not rushed, not chaotic, but purposeful. Intentional. Mercer's head turned slightly toward the door, his focus shifting without breaking. He did not need to ask. He already understood. The secure line remained open, the soft hum steady, waiting. Hayes had not moved. Not once. He still sat with that same quiet presence, his gaze resting on the mission map as if none of this concerned him, as if the room had not just shifted around him in ways none of them could control. His hand rested on the cane, fingers relaxed, unmoving. The footsteps grew closer. The door at the far end of the room remained closed, but the air around it felt different now, charged, expectant. Reed swallowed once, barely noticeable, and adjusted his stance. Mercer straightened, his posture tightening, not out of habit, but out of instinct. Something was about to enter that room, something that outranked everything inside it. The handle turned. The door opened without hesitation, not slowly, not dramatically, but with the kind of precision that came from purpose, and every man in the room felt it before they fully saw it. The figure that stepped inside did not need introduction. General Robert Kane carried no visible urgency in his stride, but the air shifted around him all the same, as if the room itself adjusted to accommodate his presence. His uniform was immaculate, every line sharp, every detail exact, but it was not the uniform that commanded attention. It was the way he moved through the space, direct and unbroken, his focus already locked onto a point before him. Mercer straightened immediately, instinct overriding thought, his posture snapping into place with a precision he had not displayed all morning. Around him, the operators followed without a word, chairs sliding back softly, boots aligning against the floor, the entire room falling into a silent, unified stance. No commands were given. None were needed. Kane did not acknowledge them. Not yet. His gaze passed over the room in a single sweep, taking in the positions, the tension, the open secure line, still humming softly at the console. Then it stopped. It did not hesitate. It did not search. It landed directly on Daniel Hayes. For a brief moment, nothing else existed in the room. The distance between them closed with each measured step Kane took forward, his boots striking the concrete with a steady rhythm that echoed in the silence. Reed remained at the console, unmoving, his hand still resting near the controls, as if stepping away now would break something he did not fully understand. Mercer held his position, but his attention had shifted completely, no longer on control, no longer on command, but on the man he had challenged just minutes before. Kane stopped a few feet in front of Hayes. Close enough to see him clearly. Close enough to confirm. The silence stretched again, but it was no longer uncertain. It was deliberate. Hayes did not rise. He did not adjust his posture. He simply looked up, meeting Kane's gaze with the same quiet steadiness he had carried from the moment he entered the room. For a fraction of a second, something passed between them, something unspoken, something older than rank, older than protocol. Recognition. Kane drew in a slow breath, and when he spoke, his voice carried none of the authority it had used moments ago over the secure line. It carried something else. Respect. Permission to address you, he said, the words precise, formal, but softened by something deeper. The effect was immediate. Mercer's eyes flickered, the shift hitting him harder than anything that had come before. The room felt it too, every operator standing there suddenly aware that the structure they relied on had just changed in a way they could not ignore. Hayes held Kane's gaze for a moment longer, then gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. No words, just acknowledgement. Kane straightened, just slightly, the movement controlled, deliberate, and then he spoke again, this time with clarity that left no room for doubt. Titan 3. The call sign did not echo. It did not need to. It settled into the room with finality. Around them, the operators did not move, but something in their stance shifted, subtle but undeniable, as understanding replaced uncertainty. Mercer felt it fully now, the weight of his earlier words, the realization settling in with a quiet force that left no room for denial. King did not look at him. Not yet. His focus remained on Hayes, unwavering, as if everything else in the room had become secondary. The secure line on the console clicked softly as the open channel disconnected on its own, its purpose fulfilled. No one reached for it. No one needed to, because the answer was no longer coming from somewhere else. It was standing right there in front of them, and for the first time since the briefing had begun, every man in that room understood exactly what they were looking at. The room did not move, but something within it shifted completely, like a line had been drawn and quietly crossed without anyone noticing the exact moment it happened. Mercer stood rigid, his posture still perfect, but the certainty that had once filled it was gone, replaced by a sharp awareness of every word he had spoken, every assumption he had made. His eyes remained fixed forward, but his focus had narrowed, no longer scanning the room, no longer commanding it, but absorbing what stood in front of him. General Kane did not raise his voice, did not turn to address the others, but his presence alone held the room in place. He took a single step closer to Hayes, closing the last bit of distance, and for the first time since entering, he inclined his head slightly, a gesture so small it could have been missed, but no one in that room missed it. It was not protocol. It was not routine. It was deliberate. Hayes acknowledged it with the same quiet stillness he had carried from the beginning, his expression unchanged, his posture steady, as if none of this required reaction. Kane exhaled slowly, then turned just enough to address the room without breaking that connection entirely. "Stand easy," he said, his tone calm, controlled, but carrying an authority that allowed no delay. The operators responded instantly, though not with the same ease as before. Movements were measured now, deliberate, as if each man was recalibrating his place in the room. Chairs shifted softly, boots adjusted, but no one relaxed completely. The tension had not disappeared. It had transformed. Kane's gaze moved across them, brief but precise, taking in their posture, their silence, their attention. Then it settled, not on Mercer first, but on Reed. "You accessed a restricted channel," Kane said, not as a question, but as a statement. Reed straightened further, his voice steady. "Yes, sir." Kane gave a slight nod, acknowledging the answer without judgment. "You did the right thing." The words landed quietly, but their impact was immediate. Reed did not react outwardly, but something in his shoulders eased, just slightly, the weight of uncertainty lifting by a fraction. Kane then turned his attention to Mercer. The shift was subtle, but it carried weight. Mercer met his gaze, his expression controlled, but there was no mistaking the change beneath it. He was no longer evaluating the situation. He was inside it. Kane held that look for a moment, long enough for the message to settle without being spoken. Then he stepped back just enough to bring Hayes fully into the center of the room, not physically moving him, but shifting the focus entirely onto him. "You were about to brief a mission," Kane said, his voice returning to a neutral command tone, but still carrying that underlying respect. "You will continue." Mercer blinked once, the instruction catching him off guard for the briefest second, then he nodded. "Yes, sir." His voice was steady, but quieter than before. He turned toward the screen, but something had changed in the way he stood. The confidence was still there, but it had been tempered, refined, stripped of arrogance, and replaced with something closer to discipline. He began to speak, outlining the operation, the terrain, the objective, but his words carried a different weight now, each one more deliberate, more precise. And as he spoke, Hayes watched, not interrupting, not correcting, just observing, his eyes moving across the map, following the lines, the elevations, the unseen variables that did not appear on any screen. At one point, Mercer paused, just briefly, his gaze flickering toward Hayes without turning his head, as if sensing something he could not yet name. The room noticed it. No one spoke. No one moved. Because now, every man there understood that the briefing was no longer just a briefing. It was being witnessed. And that changed everything. Mercer's voice carried through the room with steady control, each word deliberate, each detail placed carefully against the glowing map. But the rhythm had changed, no longer driven by assumption, but guided by awareness. He moved through the terrain analysis, outlining elevations in feet, wind patterns across the valley, lines of approach that looked clean on the screen, but felt less certain under the weight of unseen variables. The operators followed closely, their attention sharper now, their earlier confidence replaced by a quiet discipline that matched the shift in the room. No one interrupted. No one questioned. Because for the first time, they were not just listening to the plan. They were listening for what might be missing. Hayes remained seated, his presence unchanged, but his eyes moved with purpose, tracing routes, pausing at points that did not quite align, seeing something deeper than what was displayed. Mercer reached the final phase of the briefing and paused, just for a second, his gaze lingering on a narrow pass marked as the primary route. It looked efficient, direct, controlled, but something about it held his attention longer than it should have. He did not speak immediately. Instead, almost without realizing it, he turned slightly, not fully facing Hayes, but enough to acknowledge him. The room felt it instantly. That small shift carried more weight than any command. Hayes did not look surprised. He had been waiting. Not impatiently. Not expectantly. Just ready. Mercer hesitated for a fraction of a second, then spoke, his voice quieter than before, but clearer. "Is there something we are not seeing?" The question hung in the air, simple and direct, but it carried a humility that had not existed when the briefing began. No one in the room moved. All eyes shifted to Hayes. He studied the map for a long moment, his gaze fixed on that same narrow pass, his expression calm, unreadable. Then his hand lifted slightly, the movement slow, deliberate, and he pointed, not at the center of the route, but just off to the side, where the terrain dipped almost imperceptibly. "Wind does not follow lines," he said quietly. His voice carried easily, steady and controlled. It bends where the ground tells it to. He let the words settle, then continued, just enough to complete the thought. That pass will look clear from above. It will not feel that way inside it. The room absorbed it instantly. Mercer's eyes shifted back to the map, recalculating, seeing the route differently now, not as a straight line, but as a living space shaped by forces the system did not fully capture. One of the operators adjusted his stance, his attention sharpening further, already reworking the approach in his mind. Reed glanced at the screen, then back to Hayes, a quiet understanding settling into place. Kane watched it all without speaking, his expression unchanged, but there was a subtle approval in the stillness of his posture. Mercer nodded once, slow and deliberate, the acknowledgement clear. "We adjust the route," he said, his voice firm again, but different now, grounded. No one questioned it. No one hesitated. The briefing continued, but it had transformed into something else entirely. Not just a plan, but a refinement shaped by experience that could not be taught, only carried. When it ended, the room did not erupt into movement. It held, just for a second longer, as if recognizing the moment for what it was. Hayes lowered his hand, resting it once more on the cane, his gaze drifting back to the map, already distant again. Kane stepped back slightly, giving the space room to breathe, but his presence remained anchored to Hayes. Mercer stood still, his posture composed, but his expression had shifted completely. There was no trace of earlier arrogance left. Only respect, earned without demand, understood without explanation. No one spoke as Hayes prepared to leave. No orders were given. No formal dismissal. Just a quiet path opening in front of him as the room made space without being told. And as he moved, steady and unhurried, every man there felt the same realization settle in, not loudly, not dramatically, but with a quiet certainty that would stay long after the room was empty. Some names are not meant to impress. They are meant to be remembered.